Hello, friends. I'm Amol, and I hope that all of you are doing well and keeping safe. In the last episode of the Lex Prudence podcast, we analyzed the definition and the essential elements of a contingent contract as provided by the provisions of Section 31 of the Indian Contract Act. Let us now take a step ahead and see all the possible conditions under the contingent contract which are dealt by the provisions of Section 32 to 36 and understand when and how a contingent contract becomes enforceable and under what circumstances it becomes void or unenforceable. I will try and explain most of these sections and the provisions through the examples of insurance contracts, as in my opinion, insurance is a classic and easiest example of contingent contract. So let's start. Section 32 of Indian Contract Act specifically deals with enforcement of contracts contingent on an event happening. So if it is a contract to do or not to do anything, if an uncertain future event happens, then such contract cannot be enforced by law unless and until that event actually happens. Simple as that. And if the event becomes impossible, then the contract renders itself void. This can be explained through a simple example of a uh, house property insurance where a claim for damages is payable if a house owned by me suffers damages on account of natural calamity. Now, this contract becomes enforceable only when there is some damage caused to the house while I'm owning it. If, for example, if I end up selling the house to a third party, it can no longer suffer a damage while being owned by me, and therefore the contract will render void. Simple, isn't it? Of course, keeping all variables of transfer of insurance and portability of insurance, etc., as nil, I'm keeping all the variables nil to make it as simple as possible. So if I continue owning the house and it gets damaged, I am entitled to enforce the contract. If I sell it off, I no longer own it and therefore can't have any damages suffered to the property, and therefore it becomes void. The second condition that Section 33 deals with is enforcement of contracts which are contingent on an event not happening. 32 was about event happening. Now 33 is about event not happening. So a contract to do or not to do something, if an uncertain future event does not happen, then such contract can be enforced when the happening of the event becomes impossible and not before that. So, for example, in a shipping insurance, where shipping company agrees, or rather, not shipping company agrees, insurance company agrees to pay a sum of money if a particular ship does not return from a voyage, then such claim can be enforced or becomes enforceable if the ship unfortunately sunks. Because it has now sunk, it is impossible to return, and therefore the claim becomes enforceable. Here, the contingent event was ship not returning, not happening of an event. Just a small disclosure here. Typical insurance contracts will have a lot of other variables and terms governing the contracts. However, my intent is just to simply explain the concept of contingent contracts and see when it becomes enforceable and enforceable, and that's why I'm taking the simplest of possible examples under insurance. Now we have dealt with two conditions where it is dependent on happening of an event or non-happening of an event. Section 34 takes one step ahead and deals with a contract which is contingent, or when event on which contract is contingent to be deemed impossible if it is the future conduct of a living person. Now it takes one step ahead, and the contingency is dependent on how a living person behaves or conducts himself. So, in cases where the contingency in a contract is with respect to the conduct of a living person, Such contract becomes unenforceable when such person does something which renders the act impossible. Let's take an example to simplify this. ABC Private Limited agrees to increase the sponsorship fee paid by it to a particular athlete by 25% if the athlete continues to play for the national team beyond 2 years from the date of contract. Now, the athlete declares retirement from all national international sports before completion of such 2 years. So, by conduct, it is now impossible for him to play for the national team beyond 2 years, and therefore the contract will be unenforceable. Had he not retired and continued to play beyond 2 years for the national team, then the contract would have remained enforceable and 25% rise would have accrued to him. Now, let's take next section, which is dependent on happening of specified event within a fixed time. Now there's one more variable that is attached which is dealt by section 35, that is time period, and most of our insurance contracts have that time period attached to it, right? So in short, if a contingency, or rather if the contingency in a contract is time dependent, then the contract will render unenforceable if condition remains unsatisfied after the lapse of such time period as prescribed. Shall we take an example? A simple car insurance. It's a classic case of Section 35 contingent contract. If car suffers damages within a specified period, damages are paid, typically 1 year. Post termination of such period, no damages will be covered by the insurance company. So it is time dependent. The contingency or the happening or non happening of the event, contingent event, has to happen within a specified time period. If it doesn't, that's it. The contract is unenforceable. And then the last but not the least is section 36, which deals with agreement which are contingent on an impossible event. Now, if it is contingent on an impossible event, you would assume that it's a sham contract, it's a null contract, right? And rightly so, section 36 says that any contract which is based on an impossible event is void. I'll discuss this specific section in slightly more detailed conversation in coming episode, as in my opinion it has gained relevance in last few years, especially around the way force majeure clauses in the contract are inserted. So that will be an interesting one. Obviously it is going to be my personal opinion around this section, and let's see how it goes. So friends, I hope you liked the discussion in this episode. If you did, then I'm confident that you will be interested in a few personal point of views that I'll share in coming episodes as well. Till then, do search for Lex Prudence, LEXPRUDENCE, on your favorite podcast platform, Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, Breaker, or Radio Public, and listen, subscribe, and share. Have a great day and take good care of yourself. Goodbye.